everybody. This is going to be a lot of fun today because Chris and I were just talking about this a little bit before we started the broadcast, and there may be some of you that think we come at small groups differently, and we're going to prove you wrong today. Okay, Chris, you good with this?
I'm good. I'm ready to go.
All right, so I have Chris Surratt with me, and Chris is a good friend. He's actually one of the consultants with us at the Unstuck group. But the reason why we're talking today is he's recently released a book, his first book. It's called Small Groups for the Rest of Us. So, Chris, welcome.
Thanks. It's good to be here. Thanks, Tony.
So I want to just start with the title because you're making it sound like some of us maybe have been left out of small groups. So why the title?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. The reason I wrote Small Groups for the Rest of Us, well, one, I ripped off Apple from 1984 where they said PC for the rest of us. But really what I meant by the rest of us is me. I was starting with my story when it comes to small groups because I always felt like the typical church small group misses people like me. I'm an introvert, even though I've been a pastor for 22 years. I get energy from actually being away from people and not being with people. And so our pitch normally with small groups in churches is we feel like all of you should be with people, and that's where you should get your spiritual knowledge and you should get basically everything that you need to live life. And so I always felt a little bit left out of that picture because although I need community, and in the book I give a little bit of research, we all need community. I think we come at it from different angles, and I don't think that the church really takes that into consideration when we build our small group system. So when I said the rest of us, I could have said small groups for me, really is what I meant, because I think we're missing a big segment of people if we just keep going the direction we've been going with small groups.
Yeah, well, that's great. So, and I agree. And by the way, that leads me to my next question. I think this is where folks may think we're coming at this from different perspectives because as I work with churches, what I'm finding is some churches are really struggling with small groups, and my perception, one of the reasons why is the small groups have really become very insider focused. And one of the barriers that we're always pushing against for churches, if your church in general becomes insider focused, you're going to plateau and start to decline. Well, the same thing I'm seeing is happening in small groups. And in other words, it ends up just being this small group of people. It's just about us. We're not concerned about anybody else outside of our small group. And as a result of that, I've seen small group ministries become very unhealthy. And so in your book, you seem to be taking a different approach. You acknowledge groups are about community, but with more of an emphasis on both evangelism and discipleship. So my question is, if that's the case, how can churches begin to take that step?
I think we've gotten really good at churches of basically creating little social clubs. And that's what a lot of our small groups in churches become, is they are places for us to gather with people who think just like us, who look just like us, who vote just like us. And basically we've created what the world has created much better than we can. I mean, there are more fun social groups than what we can put on at a church. And my kind of my idea in the book is I think that small groups can and should go beyond just a group of people sitting around talking about life. I really think that it can be a key part of our evangelism strategy with our church. I make kind of the argument in the book that I believe that small groups can be the new front door for the church. And here's what I mean by that. All of us, pretty much all of us, except maybe you, Tony, I don't know if you have any friends, but most of us have some friends that exist outside of the church. And if we don't, we should. And I think that it's an easier step for somebody that we know to come to our house and do relationship with a community that already exists than even inviting them on a Sunday morning to a church service that maybe they don't have a clue what it's about. I think that's a great first step, and I think we're missing that piece when we talk about small groups at churches. So I think it can be a key evangelism piece. And then there's that discipleship piece that's very important. And I think a lot of that has to do with how much intentionality we put into the content that our groups are studying. A lot of times it's just easier to kind of leave it up to the groups and the group leaders and say, okay, whatever you want to do it. That's great as long as you're showing up. And I think that what we're doing is we're basically growing friendships and not necessarily disciples. And so I really believe that we need to start thinking about, okay, what are they studying? What are the parameters of a small group? What is the curriculum? And are we putting enough intentionality and money behind making sure that there's some discipleship taking place and not just hanging out and, like you said, kind of us in our social club, and that's what we're doing.
Yeah. In fact, just to confirm this, Chris, we've done quite a bit of research at the Unstuck group, and I'm hearing an echo. Are you hearing an echo?
No, I'm good.
All right. Well, I'll just keep talking. I assume no one else will hear the echo too. How's that? So we've done quite a bit of research, and what we have found, and again, I think this is more based on the more traditional just community, just us model of small groups, is that when someone gets in a small group, they're less likely then to engage in serving and basically helping others than the person who's serving. They're more likely to get involved into a small group. And I think it's just an indication of a part of what God's calling us to is to love God and love others. And if our small group model can be more about how do we help others take their next steps toward Christ as well through evangelistic efforts in our neighborhoods, in our current relationships, and in discipleship, I think the small group model is going to be stronger in that respect. So here's the deal. You talk a good talk, Chris. You're a good salesman, but where is this actually working? Do you have some successful models of churches that are using this approach to small groups?
Yeah, I think it's a growing trend and an exciting trend that I've seen. Kind of the first church that really grabbed my attention that seems to kind of be living this out is Saddleback. And I know when we think Saddleback, we kind of think of old school, not maybe on the edge trend. But when I read the book by Steve Gladen, Small Groups, Purpose-Driven Small Groups, it kind of opened my eyes to just the idea that small groups can be an evangelistic tool. And I've spent some time with Steve, and I've been to Saddleback, and it's the real deal. And what I see is neighbors inviting neighbors to their groups. And, they talk about they have over 100% of their people in small groups, and that's because they have people that don't even go to their church, and a lot of people that don't go to their church that are involved in their small groups. And so that was exciting for me to see that. When I read that book, I've read a lot of great books about small groups. Activates by Nelson Series, an awesome book, and several other ones. But when I read that book, I said, you know what, we need to go beyond just the walls of this church and the walls of the houses that the small groups are in. And so we started kind of experimenting with that idea at Crosspoint, where I was at for several years, and we started seeing success. When I got there, we kind of did a snapshot of how many people were involved in groups, and it was somewhere around 33%. And so we started experimenting with, hey, what if we open it up? And instead of kind of the system where we're going to put people in your groups, basically you say, I'm going to host a group on Tuesday night, 7 o'clock, send me people. What if we switched the paradigm and it became, hey, why don't you invite your friends and your neighbors, and let's put God into it. And it really started switching. Now, it took some time. It took probably about 3 years for that to start catching on, but once it did, people got excited about it. We went from about 33% to over 90% of people that were in groups. And again, when I say 90%, it's not necessarily 90% of the people that are sitting in a Sunday morning service. Probably a good 20-25% of those people weren't even attending our church yet, but we were taking attendance, and that's the numbers. And I wanted it always to kind of be that angle, where we had a good percentage of people that weren't even attending church, attending groups, because we were putting intentionality into what they were studying, and we knew what the experience was going to be like. and we saw people coming to church with their small group for the first time, and I thought that was really cool to watch.
That's great. All right, so as I mentioned in our research, we're finding a big challenge with churches. In fact, we looked at 5 core issues that churches are dealing with, and one of them ended up being this issue of discipleship, connection with groups, things like that. Churches are struggling with making this happen. Generally, Chris, why do you think churches are missing the mark here?
I think there's 3 big reasons, actually. I think the first one, and we've talked about this before, Tony, but I think the pastor has to be the champion of groups. I think it's key that the senior pastor really talks about groups, talks about their group, his group, stories coming out of his group, and really leads the way. Because if the pastor's not on board, the congregation's not going to follow. It's just that's the way it's going to be. So I think that's key number 1. The second key is that we really kind of turn that tide about what small groups are. A lot of churches are just kind of shooting at everything when it comes to small groups. They want them to be the social club. They want them to be a disciple maker. They want them to be missional, all over the board. So we really need to focus in what is the point, why do our small groups exist? And then the third thing that I think is key is that a lot of churches tend to just kind of jump from one model to the next model to the next model. So every time a new book comes out, like a Saddleback or somebody like that, they're like, okay, let's change everything we're doing and let's jump onto that model. And I just think that the congregation gets confused and they don't, their strategy is, and so they just give up trying to be in community. And so I think churches really have to now I think it's okay to take ideas, but really figure out who we are, what is our DNA, and then let's focus our groups around that. And we can open up different ideas on how to train leaders, on how to find leaders, but let's stay to the core of who we are when it comes to groups, and let's stay with it. Because like I said at Crosspoint, it took like 3-4 years for us to really gain some serious momentum, but we stayed on the same track that we were on. And so I think churches really need to do that when it comes to their group system.
Yeah, I've run into some churches or pastors specifically that have said, we've tried small groups and small groups just don't work where our church is located. But the reality is small groups aren't working because the pastor's not in one. He's never talking about one. They've not stuck with a model. They don't have a method to connect people in groups. If you don't do groups in a healthy way and you don't champion groups, no, small groups won't work in your location. But if you're doing all those things, they will. They really will. So, Chris, thanks for pushing us on this. Again, your book, it's called Small Groups for the Rest of Us. I think you'll be challenged by what Chris has to share in this resource. I really hope you'll pick it up and really process this with your team. Chris, any final thoughts before we break for today?
No, my only final thought is I'm going to come back with my fantasy football team. And, I know you're leading the league, but that's about to be over. So that's my final.
All right, Chris. Well, we'll see. I think your odds are better that you're going to help groups or churches with small groups than beat me in fantasy football, though. I'm just saying.
Probably.
All right. Thanks. This has been a conversation with Chris Surratt, and again, I hope you'll pick up his book. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Tony.